in the same topic we were covering last week, but I thought we'd do something a little different today. We're actually going to delve into the details we kind of talked about last week with an example. I'm going to use a couple diagrams that are actually found in the military manual that we're covering to illustrate one of the concepts, well, I should say most of the concepts that we talked about last week. The reason I thought we'd do this is because, just like we commented on last week, we read that against a well-prepared enemy position, you may need to engage and assault multiple portions in sequence to actually get to your objective, right? And I think that it makes sense if we kind of talked about that topic in a little more detail, since that's really what we face on the tabletop. If you think about it, our games last between 5 and 8 turns, maybe. Now, if you actually have a hex and chit type of a board game, war game, like the old Panzer Leader or Squad Leader, you may have 13 up to maybe even 16 turns to execute this, but still, given the scale of the game, it's always a finite amount of time, and it is a race against the clock. So I figured it'd be good to kind of cover the concept with some kind of illustration to kind of help you visualize what we're talking about and see if that helps it kind of sink in. So let's start by taking a quick look at the first of two diagrams. They're going to kind of show this attack developing. Alright, so as you see here, this is the first illustration that's in the book, and it's showing you the crosses are the enemy positions that you have to get through to get to your objective. Now, in this particular illustration, the objective, Chris, there is out in the open to the left. There's no unit defending it, occupying it. So it could be a supply depot. It could be, I don't know. Maybe it's a position on that slope of the hill that allows you to have unrestrained fire and visibility on some important target that's going to be attacked in the subsequent days and battles. So, for some reason, you need to get to objective Chris. All right. You'll notice that just like on a 4x6 tabletop, you've got the enemy is in kind of echelon. He's got some depth to his defenses. Now, granted, it's probably a little more depth than you might normally see in a tabletop game, given that most of us, have a 12-inch deployment zone on either end. But sometimes you get deployments or games where the opponent gets to deploy on their half of the table. So I think this actually applies pretty well to some of our games. But in this illustration, you'll see that the path that they're choosing, let me kind of show you, kind of prelude, the route we're actually going to take to hit objective Chris. We're going to be going through the right flank. Using our right flank, we're going to go through the enemy's left flank and circle through behind. Now, the reason for that is that if you take a look at the enemy dispositions, they've got one unit right in front of objective Chris. So we could just barrel right through that and get there. The problem with this is, if you remember, one of the early parts of attacking on a position is you need to fix the enemy. Fixing the enemy is all about rendering them unable to support or attack the objective after you've secured it. So that means you're going to have to deal with this concentration of firepower that's sitting there on your right flank. So the best way that they're going to approach this is to deploy their units, and we're going to kind of break this up. There's our assault unit down there in the lower right. That assault unit is about 50% of our force. Okay, that's the one that's going to really carry the brunt of the work. The breach force is maybe 20 to 30% of your force. That is going to be the units that are going to effect the breakthrough in the initial attack on the right flank. Now, other 20% or so is over here on the left, in front of this one unit. It's kind of your support element. It's positioned so that it's threatening that one unit in front of the objective to kind of keep it in place. If that unit moves, you've got a clear shot to the objective, and the opponent's not going to want that to happen. So by its presence, it simply fixes the opponent's unit where it is. It doesn't let it move, which means it cannot support where your main thrust is going to be. But your support element is positioned so it can actually rain fire, anywhere on the board. So it can support the attack right from the get-go in that breach site. Now finally, you've got a reserve and some artillery. Artillery's not going to move very fast, if at all, so you're just going to park that in the back and do whatever you need to with it. And it's always good to have a reserve, so as I already covered, you got about 100% of your units already deployed, so you can have a reserve of some other number. I was using the percentages just kind of as a scale. So effectively, the reserve is going to be as big as you think it needs to be, because the reserve is going to be what you're going to use to adjust your attack to the opponent's reactions and the vagaries of war. Sometimes the opponent, you don't do so well and you need to throw the reserve in right away. Maybe it's the breach unit that needs the help, so the reserve has to go against the breach to help the breach unit. Sometimes the assault unit, the breach unit took so much damage that it can't do its next mission, so this reserve has to go in and help mop up while the assault carries forward, or the assault gets harassed enough where it needs help, so the reserve supports the assault unit. So anyway, you'll notice in these exhibits there's also some smoke patches there. You can feel free to ignore that, because a lot of our game systems don't cover smoke really well. It just doesn't come out with a realistic effect. Once it's on the table, it has a relatively realistic effect. However, you're usually much more accurate in your placement of smoke, and most game systems don't incorporate smoke at all, or the systems don't generate the reliable smoke curtain you need in this illustration. So ignore the smoke for now, and we won't talk about it anymore. So let's see how this attack develops. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to send this breach unit, which is a nice sizable attack force, smashing into your opponent's defenses. That means they're going to have to actually assault those initial spots. They're going to break through the wire. They'll have to engage those couple of lead elements, usually maybe even with hand-to-hand combat, to start tearing them apart and whittling them down and hopefully pushing them back. That will open a path for your assault unit to come through, and your assault unit can now take action against the next row of defenses, who may have also been pushed back a little bit by the initial breach. And the breach units can mop up any forces that are still remaining, or even lend their weight to that assault unit in the second row of defenses. You notice the reserve is being brought up as a backup just in case, and the support element has now shifted its fire. It's now fixing this unit definitely in place, because that unit, now that the pressure is on the opponent on your right hand side, you want to make sure the opponent's units on your left hand side do not move to support it. So this support element of your force starts attacking it and forces it to concentrate on your unit in front of you. So it doesn't want to give up the position, and it may even direct fire toward your support unit instead of your breach or assault units. Alright, so hopefully turn to 3, maybe 4 mid-game, you're starting to have the assault unit mop up, break through the rest of the defense there. They may even be able to leave some units intact, allowing the reserve and the breach unit to kind of mop them up and pin them down, while the assault units actually run up forward to assault the next most important defensive position, the one right outside the objective. And so the assault unit wheels around to the back, in this case, attacks what looks like to be a bunker, and an enemy position supporting the bunker, goes at it. Again, the assault unit, being the bulk of your army, has a lot of combat capability to focus on up here under the AB 111 and AC 401. 2 units, 2 small parts of the opponent's army. Half your army is going up against those 2 units. It's a pretty overwhelming attack. Same thing when it reaches the back line against AB 101 and AB 71. Most of your army is attacking those 2 units, or small portions of the opponent's army, so you have an overwhelming advantage. This is a lot to do with the concept of, that I discussed in a very early video in my Academy series, making a fair fight unfair. You want to focus your firepower, your combat capability, against smaller portions, and that's what your assault unit is doing. You bring in the bulk of it through smaller segments of the opponent in sequence, hoping to break it through. Now, you're going to take casualties along the way. That's part of the game. That's part of the warfare, right? But by the time you break through these rear positions, there's not a lot the enemy can do to keep you off of your final objective, okay? And in fact, if the support unit has not been engaged directly by the unit here, AB 91, the assault unit can mop up and take it out from behind, giving support, basically support to the support unit, okay? Eventually basically tabling the opponent. So that's the way these develop. You start with a breach, again, in sequence. You're massing your combat capability on smaller segments, a couple units at a time, to chew them away and allow you open a gap so that you can move more units through to the next layer of defense, eventually to, in this case, the back line, to breach through the opponent's rear area, opening a path to the objective. It's the same formula. You direct fire, overwhelming firepower, combat capability on the units you're about to assault. You close in and occupy the positions if you haven't been able to force them off through morale breaking or just killing them off. And then once the position's held, you repeat with the next row of objectives. It's the same formula. Hopefully you can get that done in your 5 to 8 turns, but it's going to be a challenge, but the concept still holds. Now, I will tell you this right off the bat. When you are exercising this, give yourself a lot of time to fail, okay? These diagrams are, they illustrate the point. They're not showing you that it's going to work every time, right? It's just the illustration to help you understand the points that we've been discussing. So this method isn't going to be an always win, but it's going to give you the best chance of success as you move through. Now, of course, if the opponent, and this happens in real war, the opponent puts up a strong enough resistance at any one of those points that you have to sequentially go through, you're not going to reach your objective. That's the nature of the defender's desires, right? That's what they want to do. So it can happen. So don't think that you having difficulty making this happen means it doesn't apply. You need to exercise it. Start to visualize how you can pin down the enemy's combat capability, attack it so that it cannot support or even occupy your objective that you were trying to take, and slowly take it out in detail, really, is what it is. Hopefully, so with some practice and some study on your part, you'll actually be able to apply this more often on the tabletop without having to resort to what some would call cheesy lists or special units that have special abilities that can automatically, overwhelm in a close combat situation. Every game has their units that are just so, we'll use some people's favorite letters, OP, in certain game systems when it comes to close combat. Or if you just take a bunch of these, you can steamroll your way across. Well, that's one way of doing it. However, that's the only way you're going to do it if you take that approach. Try to be more flexible, because that set of units that's so, quote, OP in close combat can get chewed up other ways. And if you don't know how to adapt and be flexible and use some of these techniques, and that special unit that you've got starts getting chewed up, now you don't have it anymore, or it's really weak and can't be as effective, number one, you're not going to have as much fun because you can't do what you came to do, and you're not going to be learning as much. Honestly, we all want to have fun and learn and be better, and when your opponent puts up a good fight, that should be part of having the fun. By allowing yourself to have a broader, toolbox instead of just these specialized units, you can adapt more readily to what your opponent might do. You may come up against a scenario where you may have wanted to take an objective, but things change completely, and that objective is no longer important, and no longer do you want to be assaulting the position. You need to do something else. Remember, as was earlier stated, don't get so caught up in the plan that you forget to consider how the battle may have changed. Sun Tzu said it, these manuals have said it, Liddell Hart said it, everybody else. It's a military science axiom. Don't get hung up on your plan so much that you basically lose sight to the changing situation on the battlefield. So hopefully this illustration with these two diagrams has kind of helped you see how you would develop this assault on the opponent's position. And next week what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about a mounted attack. Now this isn't necessarily with cavalry, but it is going to be mounted troops. Usually that's troops inside being carried by a vehicle. But we'll talk about dragoons, I guess the best way. Mounted infantry. That would be they don't fight on horseback. They arrive at the battlefield on horse, dismount, and then they engage. So we'll kind of take a look at some of the concepts about assaulting when you're dealing with mounted forces. All right, so I hope this is helpful. Please share, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.